Well, hello. Welcome to the Calvary Chapel Salmon podcast. So good to see everyone. Hopefully you could hear me there. Sometimes when we're quiet, it's really hard to hear us. But we are here. We are excited. We are recording. I'm joined with Hagen. Hagen, it's been a while. We haven't seen you.
That's right. I missed last week's
Yeah.
podcast, but I watched half of you and Lee's, but I hear
Okay.
that it gets real good. So
Yeah.
it was good to have him on as a guest.
For sure. No, me and Lee had a lot of fun, honestly. Yeah. I was a little worried that it wouldn't go too well.
No.
But me and Lee really connected.
Please, well,
Yeah,
good.
yeah. So that's good. Yeah. I didn't know. There's a lot in Lee's story that I didn't know.
Mm.
So I was happy. I didn't know that he was in such a big band. So.
You didn't know it was such a big deal.
Well, like
yeah.
I thought he was like in a band, like that was like a like we played
Just like,
once
oh,
for my
we're in a band.
grandma's birthday party.
Yeah.
But apparently it was a pretty big deal, and the band's still going, which is
Yeah.
cool. So that was last week, but that's in the past.
Yeah.
We're not people who focus on
Forgetting
the
the things that
past.
are behind, we press forward.
Yes, we're pressing forward today, and we are talking about a whole bunch of stuff today. Maybe we'll see where it goes. We're not quite sure. We're gonna talk about language as a Christian. I think we're gonna talk about what's appropriate for a Christian to say, to joke about, what's appropriate for a Christian to consume as far as media goes.
Okay.
I'm sure we'll talk about liberty and all sorts of different things, and conviction. I don't know if I said that word already, but we'll be talking about those kind of things. And Hagen, this is a conversation that we've had a couple of times, actually.
Right, and
Yeah.
we decided to be a good one to do for a podcast because we kind of disagree on it.
Sometimes, yeah.
I think our heart is the same.
For sure.
But in practice, we kind of fall in two different areas.
Yeah.
So it'll be fun to kind of work our way through it, and we just kind of stumbled upon this accidentally.
For sure.
As far as our disagreement on it. And even just last night and this morning, I got some verses together and just thinking through things, and I'm more convinced that I'm right now than ever.
Oh, wow, that's good.
It'll be
great.
fun
That's a
to,
great place to start.
to hear
Yeah.
your kind of side
well,
of it.
my side's always, I'm always not changing, but I'm always just like evolving the way that I think about these things, and I
No.
want to be.
And I'm obviously joking too. Like,
Oh, really?
I mean, I do think that I
You do think
I
that
think
you're
I
right.
take a gracious approach to it, and you take a legalistic approach to it.
Oh, yes.
But we'll see as we develop this morning.
Whoa.
So our language, our words are important,
For sure, that's a good place to start.
and throughout the Bible we see Jesus, we see James. I'm sure there's stuff in Proverbs that just talk about the importance of what's coming out of our mouths as just people in general, and the power of words. Words are powerful, and not to sound too name it and claim it, but it's by the words that came out of God's mouth that everything was created. It's by the power of life and death is in the tongue.
Yeah, it's
Proverbs says.
yeah.
So our words are powerful, and sometimes we get sloppy with our speech and with our intent and with our heart and with our motives when it comes to our words. And I think that we can both agree probably that God's word calls us to being mindful and having control over what comes
For
out of our
sure.
mouth.
Yeah, self-control is definitely a big thing. Probably a good verse just to preface this whole conversation, in my opinion at least, would be Ephesians chapter 4, the ending of it, and then the beginning of Ephesians chapter 5. Ephesians chapter 4 says... Oh, wait, I'm in the NLT. Let me get out of the NLT.
That's NIV,
Yeah.
nearly inspired version.
I like the NLT.
I like the NLT as well.
Thank you. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 29 says, "Let no corrupt word proceed out of your mouth, but what is good for necessary edification or building up, that it may impart grace to the hearers. And do not grieve the Holy Spirit of God, by whom you were sealed for the day of redemption. Let all bitterness, wrath, anger, clamor, and evil speaking be put out away from you, with all malice, and be kind to one another, tenderhearted, forgiving one another, even as God in Christ forgave you." Chapter 5, verse 1, "Therefore be imitators of God as dear children, and walk in love, as Christ also has loved us and given himself for us, an offering and a sacrifice to God for a sweet-smelling aroma. But fornication and all uncleanness or covetousness, let it not be named among you, as is fitting for saints. Neither filthiness, nor foolish talking, nor coarse jesting, which are not fitting, but rather giving of thanks. For this you know, that no fornicator, unclean person, nor covetous man who is an idolater has any inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and God. Let no one deceive you with empty words, for because of these things the wrath of God comes upon the sons of disobedience. I like how it ends there, going back to what you said, the importance of our words. It says God's going to judge the planet. Right there it says because of the things people are saying, because of the filthiness, because of the evil that they're speaking. And in those verses, Paul made it very clear that there is a standard for how Christians should communicate with one another, and there's a standard for the things that should come out of our mouth. I think today we're going to talk about what that standard is, but there definitely is one. Paul says that no filthy language, no coarse jesting. Coarse jesting, I would just simply classify as just like inappropriate joking. And again, we'll talk about there's a lot of different ways to approach that, but just at the basic of it, yeah, inappropriate joking, coarse jesting, filthiness, don't have that in you. Corrupt language. And yeah, I think Paul says it in a bunch of different ways, maybe to cover a couple different bases, maybe just to say, hey, don't talk like this.
Yeah.
So yeah. That's a good starting point.
There's the verse.
For
now
sure.
translate into life.
Application.
What would you say that means?
Yeah. I think I was thinking about this morning. I think applying this verse is at the same time, this is going to get a little deep here, Hagen. Follow me.
Buckle
up.
At
the same time, it's super easy to apply and then not so easy to apply. How's it super easy to apply? Well, as I was reading those verses as corrupt language or filthy talk or coarse jesting or inappropriate language, as I said those words, whatever popped into your mind or whatever popped into the person listening to this, your mind, that for you would be that thing. And you should avoid that thing. The Holy Spirit, I believe, if you're a believer, he's in you. And when you hear those words of, hey, don't speak filthily, don't say this, don't say coarse jesting, whatever words or jokes or things popped into your mind of, that's what inappropriate language is, well, then that's what it is. And you shouldn't say it. And I would believe there is a variety there, but I think that's a big part of our conversation is going to be there's different levels of conviction. And so if certain bad words popped into your mind when I said filthy language, well, those are bad words and you shouldn't say them. And that's just true for you, and you should live like that. That's the simple way to say it. That's a very easy way. And I think that's, if we're honest with ourselves, that's a very just good way to look at it, because when we do read those words, things do pop into our heads and it's like, yeah, I shouldn't be saying that. And yeah, I think if we're honest with ourselves, that's the easy way to look at it. It gets a little bit harder when we want to set straight boundaries for all people, for all Christians. It gets a little bit more difficult because there is liberty, there is freedom, and some word that I might say in one context might not be bad for me, but the same word in a different context for a different person might be bad for them. So I think in a simple way, it's very easy to answer, okay, what's filthy language, what's corrupt talk? Well, it's whatever pops into your mind when those words are said. That's easy. But in a different way, it's kind of difficult because we don't want to be legalistic. We don't want to be setting rules and boundaries that the Bible doesn't set. And we want to be mindful that there are people who have freedom, and we don't want to be controlling or... Yeah, we don't want to be putting taboos on things God doesn't put taboos on. So we want to be careful as far as that. So does that make sense? How it's easy and hard at the same time?
Sure. So in that category of filthy language, would you suggest that pretty much what our culture sees as swear words go into that category?
I would say for the most part, yeah. If that's what comes into your mind when I said filthy language, then that would be, yeah, then if that's filthy language for me, I shouldn't say it. And I would assume that's probably filthy language for you. I would say that.
Correct. Yeah. I don't swear much at all.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
But the where we start to differ a little bit is I would say that if you're substituting a swear word for another word that's much more acceptable, it's just as bad. Because I think that in Matthew chapter 15, Jesus teaches that it's not what goes into the mouth that defiles a man, it's what comes out, because from the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. And the point is that is not the people focus on the word part that's coming out, which is true, but it's the heart part into which it's coming from. So my challenge is against Christians that don't say any of the naughty words as far as what culture sees, but they fill those gaps with just Christian swear words, people might say. And to me, if your heart is the same as the guy who's using the real swear words, then you're actually no better, but you can think that you are because you're not just saying the F word or the SH word or the D word or whatever the case might be. You're using a more common slang that actually means the exact same thing. It's just way more acceptable.
And I would agree with that. I just wouldn't say that's the whole picture. I would completely agree if you're a Christian and you say, gosh darn it, but in your heart you're just as angry and just as upset as the person saying the other way of saying it, then that's the same, and God sees that, and God sees the heart, and the heart is the intent is very, very important. But I would also say that the intent is not the only factor in this equation. I think that culture, this is again probably where we disagree, but I think culture does get a say as far as what's acceptable talk and what's not acceptable talk. Paul in Ephesians is talking about a kind of speak, a kind of language, filthiness, inappropriate talk that was just these words are not okay. And for Paul's culture, it was probably a little different. They didn't have the same swear words as we did back then, but I think they were probably still joking around about the same stuff. I think humans aren't that creative. We don't change too much. And there were probably jokes about body parts back then. There were probably jokes about gay people. Gay people were a real thing back then. They were joking about these things back in the day with Paul, and we just keep joking about them. So when Paul says don't joke about these things, or don't say these kind of words, or don't talk about these kind of things, this filthy talk, it's the words themselves. In that culture, there were these words that it's like, hey, don't talk like this, because that's not how you're supposed to be talking, because culture looks at these words and says, don't talk like this, because these are filthy words in this culture. And we look at that today, and Paul says, don't say these words. And there are words in our culture. It's like, yeah, those are inappropriate, filthy words. And we know that they're inappropriate and filthy because in our culture, we say, well, there's certain words that I just shouldn't say around young kids. Like, we just know this instinctively. You even get the person with the most filthy mouth in the world, even they will admit, yeah, I'll try and tone it down if I'm talking to like a 3-year-old. They'll even admit, like, yeah,
maybe,
I should,
yeah.
maybe.
That's right.
Maybe, but
because if you're raised in a family where swearing is common, you're way more likely to swear and think it's normal.
It's normal, but you still know these words are not. You still know, even, and I think that's probably a bad push, because I think in our culture we're trying to get rid of this idea of filthy and clean. We're trying to combine the two, and that's a push in our culture. But I would say even a person growing up in a home where swearing is very common, they know that those are swear words. Like, they still have that category in their mind, and they say these words are swear. They just know they're filthy words because it's just. We know that there's some words that are like this, and they should know, like, okay, maybe during like I'm talking to grandma, maybe I don't talk like this. They know that. They know that instinctively, because even in our culture today, there is still this idea of filthy and clean, and I believe that our world is pushing towards the breaking down of that wall, where there is no filthy and clean, and I see that as a bad thing.
I think they only know that because they're taught it, though. They're conditioned it.
It's culture. It is culture.
Yeah.
It is culture, right? Yeah, it's culture. But culture does matter. The intent matters, definitely. What's coming out of the heart, it matters a lot. Someone who's just talking and saying a bunch of swear words, but they have a completely clean heart, that I would say that's better than somebody saying not swear words, but with a really angry heart. I would say that this person's better, because the intent does matter a whole bunch.
Okay, yes.
But culture does matter too. And these words are inappropriate. And Paul says, as Christians, we don't want to be saying these words because culture does matter. It's not the end all be all. Culture's not the main thing we want to worry about. But I think it does definitely contribute.
See, I think it's
there's other things that contribute too.
I think to me, I think it's dangerous to let culture dictate that, because then you apply it to another situation, and if you take that logic and apply it to another situation, then you don't like it as much, I would argue. So if we watch our culture slowly start to develop language, words, right now in our culture, making up new words for different kinds of genders, or making up new words for this thing and that thing, or making it appropriate to talk about a singular person in a plural sense, such as they, them. 100 years down the road, that logic becomes cultural, and now you're dictating the culture onto the believer. And I think it's backwards. I think the believer in the church influences the culture, not the other way around.
I think the church lives in a culture.
I agree.
think that's true. Yes. So I would agree that culture, there's limits to where culture is important, but it's still, like, I wouldn't just like throw it out. Just because, okay, our culture can get really bad one day doesn't mean that we just want to completely ignore what the culture says is good about it. Going back to like Paul was living in a culture where there were good words and there were bad words, right?
Sure.
And he said,
like in our culture,
avoid this filthy language, avoid this talk. The words themselves changed with the culture, but the rule is still the same, where there's just some words you don't want to talk about. And I would say even, and again, there's a push in our culture where we want to ignore the fact that there's filthiness and cleanness, and we want to just kind of combine it all. And I think it's good that we as Christians have in our minds, and I think this goes back to what you said, we want to determine the culture. I think it's good to a degree, but some people can go crazy with this, that we as a church, we have in our mind that there is clean ways of speaking and there's unclean ways of speaking, and we're very set on that. And I think that's a good thing. I think we can abuse that and make it go a little crazy, but I think that's it. And at the same time, I think that's a good thing.
And I'm not advocating swearing, but my problem is I think you can take that logic and apply it to maybe how someone looks and fall into a terrible trap.
For sure. Yeah.
Because there's a biker gang culture. And here in two or three, I don't know, probably a month, we're going to have the Christian Motorcycle Association who comes up here and visits us. There's going to be 20 people who are wearing leather, who are tattooed out, and culturally there's a statement in how they're looking. And not that long ago in church history, church culture would look at that culture and say, no way can Jesus be in you and you look like that and even act like that, because there's an attitude and there's a culture and there's an action towards this subculture. And yet these people love Jesus, they share his word, but they are just identifying with this subculture in society, which is being a biker gang. And I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I would say that's probably church culture judging other cultures. What I'm talking about is there's a general, just universal, everywhere in America you go culture that we want to be aware of. And I think that's a distinction that I can make. But yeah, culture is important. It's not the key thing. I would say that intent's more important than culture. But I think it would be a mistake for us as Christians to say, well, culture doesn't matter at all. I can say whatever I want, because that's kind of as long as I have a good heart, I can say whatever I want. It doesn't matter. There's nothing inappropriate about this word, and it doesn't matter. And I can just say as long as I have a good heart. I think that's a mistake, because you're not taking consideration at all the fact that no, our world does look at that word and say that's inappropriate. The unchristian world looks at that word and says it's inappropriate. We as Christians saying that word will give a very bad message to the unchristian world. I think that's something we want to be aware of and consider. So culture's not the end-all, be-all. It's a factor. Another factor I would say, and I think we talked about this earlier, is audience. I think audience does matter as far as what we're saying and what we're joking about. There's things that I will say to my wife, Avery, that I will never say to all sorts of different people, because audience and context matters a whole bunch as far as we're saying. An example of context mattering, that's another factor. I thought about this. You can make the general rule, don't joke about homosexuals, don't joke about gayness. and like because it's inappropriate. And that would be a good general rule, I would say. But then you could have someone come along and say the joke of, and I'm stealing this joke from the comedian Theo Von, but it's a funny one. He says, "There's so many gay people nowadays. You throw a frisbee and you hit a gay guy." It's like, well, the context of that joke, it's like it's not really joking about anything inappropriate. It's just the frisbee. There's a lot of gay people, so I think context there really matters. Like there's nothing wrong with that joke. And so, yeah, the context matters, intent matters, culture matters, audience matters, and I think you take conviction matters. Conviction, if you think you shouldn't do it, then you shouldn't do it. All those things in my mind all contribute to this idea of what should we say and what should we not say. And I think if you miss out on any of those, you'll end up saying things that you shouldn't and can hurt your witness and hurt your walk. But you want to be well-rounded and consider all those things and allow the Holy Spirit to guide you. So that's kind of where I come with it, whereas like we want to be considering all these factors.
So personally, I have a pretty high, the word isn't this, but a pretty high pain tolerance towards swear words. Yeah. Which is interesting because growing up, I didn't grow up in a house that swore at all.
Yeah.
And
but then you went to public school.
Well, sure.
And they corrupted
but then,
you.
I mean, you get used to it there a little bit. So like I'll watch a movie that has maybe quite a bit of swear words. If it's a good movie, like it has a good storyline, it's entertaining. Like I can overlook words in order for like the storyline. And some Christians don't want to do that or can't do that. If it has these words in it, I'm just not going to watch it, they'll say. And that's okay. But it's okay if I can put up with that or tolerate that in order to enjoy a movie maybe.
Yeah.
Yes
and I would agree with that. I think it's different for the person, and you want to just you want to be honest with yourself. We talked about this. You talked about this on Sunday. Liberty's hard. Having freedom in Christ is hard. We would prefer if there were just a set rules where if a movie says this word, don't watch it, or if a movie has this and that, don't watch it. But there is no such thing. It's liberty and there's freedom. And when we're watching something, we do want to be praying and just asking, like, is this okay? Is this corrupting me? Is this bothering me? And if so, you should just turn it off. But sure, I think there's a big difference between saying a swear word and listening to someone else say it. Those two things are not the same. Yeah. You saying it and listening to someone else. If we had to avoid listening to swear words, we would turn into the Amish or something and just never go out. We're gonna hear that kind of thing, and we just want to be careful of am I watching this movie because I really want to hear swear words, or it's like because I don't know, maybe some people do that. It's like it's just I want to fight against this cultural norm and I want to fight it and hear these things, and it's like or do you just want to watch it because it's a good movie and has a good message, has a good story, but to communicate that they have swear words because real people say swear words and this is a real story, then it's like that's okay. And so you just want to be you want to be asking yourself. And it's hard because it's liberty, it's freedom. It's not just a set rule. So you have to have a relationship with Jesus and be asking him.
Would there ever be a time in your life where you're hanging out with someone and you're with someone that's swearing and you would like ask them not to? Or would you? Because to me, I don't think there would be.
Yeah. I think.
Or swearing.
That's a hard
being
question.
Inappropriate,
I think I would. Well, I think the context is key. If I'm in a group with other people and this guy's using language, then I would probably, and I think I have done this in the past, tell someone, hey, stop using that language. Like, hey, we're in a group. If I'm having a one-on-one conversation with someone, someone's just trying to be honest with me, and this is how they talk, then no, I'm not going to focus on that. I'm not going to because I'm trying to build bridges. I'm trying to communicate with this person. So it depends. I think definitely if there's other people around, then If there's not other people around, then for sure it's then not a big deal. If I'm really close friends with this person and we like know each other and we're open with each other and it comes up. Maybe not like in a second, like where it's like, oh, he says it, then I'm like, hey, don't say that. But maybe just in conversation, be like, hey, man, you kind of swear a lot. And I think I've actually done this in the past too. You kind of say these words a lot, maybe don't do that, basically, and just kind of have that conversation, be like, hey, these words aren't good. Like, we as Christians shouldn't be saying these. I have had that conversation, but never in the sense of like, this person says a bad word, and so now I need to get them right there in that moment when we're just having a one-on-one. Like, I stop the conversation just to say no. Like, that's not wise. That's not building bridges. That's we want to be very aware of how we're coming across to people, and me doing that would just be like, oh, look at me, I'm so holy, I can't even hear these words.
Sure.
Like, you don't want to do that. But yeah, in other contexts, sure, I would say, hey, don't say that, we're in a group, or hey, we're friends. Why, you probably shouldn't be using this language.
Have you ever heard someone swear in church?
Yeah.
Yeah.
A couple times.
Me
yeah,
too.
It happens.
Talking to people. So here's the thing.
Yeah.
So, because there's this, there's several different types of people, but there's people that maybe will say a swear word in church and they'll be like, oh, I shouldn't say that here. And there's other people who just keep on going, not even realizing.
Yes.
The second is my favorite.
Yeah.
Because what that shows me is that there's maybe at least a bit of consistency in this person.
For sure.
Meaning that if you're going to swear when I see you across the street in Murdoch's, but now you step into a building that's a church and now you feel like you need to like straighten up a little bit. I don't know. There's this balance between like wanting to pursue holiness, wanting to be more like Jesus intentionally, but then also hypocrisy.
For sure.
And I don't even know how that balance works in my own life.
Exactly.
Because
there's things that I will say, joke around with people outside of here that I would never say here, and I think it's just true of everyone.
Sure.
And it's just like, yeah, I don't want to be a hypocrite, and sometimes I am.
Yeah. Because sometimes, say you're hanging out with some friends and they say something funny that's maybe a little inappropriate, and you have two choices. You either maybe laugh, or you don't laugh. Or you don't laugh and you're dramatic about not laughing, meaning like, oh, that's not funny, or we shouldn't joke about that.
Choices,
but
really.
then, but then they turn on you and they go, because your heart actually does think it's funny, right? Or maybe the flesh of you actually does think it's funny.
Yeah.
But then you're supposed to be a good Christian boy, and you go, well, that's just not funny. But it actually is funny. So it's like there's this battle between hypocrisy and maybe like pretending to be spiritual, but am I supposed to fake it till I make it?
Or is that just self-control?
Right.
Like not laughing, is that just me saying, you know what, that I do think that's funny, but because I don't want to encourage this thing, I'm trying to be a good witness, I'm going to self-control. And I see what you mean. Like that could be, if your heart's not right, that could be, well, I just want to appear spiritual, so I'm not going to say anything. I think that's a wrong heart, but I also see that it could very clearly just be like, you know what, I just don't want to encourage this. I'm going to use my self-control and not laugh. So I could see both sides to that, yeah.
Are you able to sit through something that's funny and not laugh?
I think what we find funny is different, Hagen. You something I appreciate about you, Hagen, is that you find the humor in a lot of things.
Man,
you just
life
find
is
the humor.
so funny to
that's
me.
Great,
and
that's awesome.
I'm
That's
surprised
good.
I'm able to do funerals sometimes because like I'll just find humor in the littlest of things, and it's like okay, I cannot laugh in this situation.
And that's good. And that's great. Yeah, you never want to lose that. Yeah, that's something I really like, because then you're laughing. I'm like, and I realize, oh, this is kind of funny. So yeah. And humor in general is just like an interesting thing. What's funny, what's not funny. I would argue that most of the time inappropriate jokes usually actually aren't that funny, but because we have in our mindset this idea that the more brass and dark and evil and inappropriate something is, the more shocking it is, a shock factor. Oh my gosh, he said that word. The more we laugh, because we just kind of are. I would say we're trained to think like that. We're trained to think that the more brass and inappropriate something is, the more funny it is. Even though in actuality, it's probably like a comedians nowadays, they're all just kind of swearing. And then, like, the punchline is the F word.
Sure.
And the punchline is like, that's not that creative. That's not that funny, really. But because we're trained to like, oh, he said the F word, it's so funny. We're like trained to laugh at that. So we kind of encourage that. So that's a whole thing. And I do think that there is a general push in the world as well to encourage to encourage the breaking down of the walls between filthy and unclean, to just kind of push like, oh, it's funny, talk about these filthy, gross things. Oh, it's funny, talk about that, and we justify it. Oh, it's funny, so it's okay to joke about these things. It's okay to say these things. And I think there is a general push in the world from the enemy towards this direction. So, yeah.
Yeah.
But what's funny, what's not funny, that's an interesting thing. Hopefully, I like this. I heard this from someone recently. Hopefully you get to the point in your Christian walk where you hear a joke that maybe the old you would have laughed at or you a year ago would have laughed at. But now that you've kind of really been letting Jesus work on you, you actually don't even think it's funny because you've just been maybe using self-control, or you maybe just been filled with the Spirit, and you're just like, yeah, I maybe used to laugh at that, but I realize now that that's actually not that funny, that joking about these kind of things, and that's a progressive thing that happens hopefully in everyone's life, every Christian's life, is I'm joking about these things, they're not as funny as they used to be. And hopefully that happens. And I've seen that happen in my life where it's like, yeah, I just don't find humor in these kind of things anymore. So, yeah.
Yeah, or with like music.
For sure, and yeah, that's a progressive thing. Yeah, what
I
kind
like
of
music, and I used to listen to this kind of music maybe, but
now
all of a sudden it's like it just doesn't do it for me like it used to, because I'm just listening to the lyrics and it's not
what I want.
Wholesome.
Yeah, and that's not like a set rule of legalism where it's like I'm now following these laws. No, it's just liberty. It's a relationship with Jesus where it's like now I'm at this point in my relationship with Jesus where he is pruning these things out of my life. He's taking away these things that maybe aren't necessarily like the worst, but Jesus just says, yeah, I don't want you listening to that anymore. I don't want you talking like that anymore, and get these things out. And yeah. And I think we want to be sensitive to everyone. Every Christian's probably in a different spot with that. Like I look at other Christians like they don't have the same convictions as me. They're not at the same point. They don't have the same relationship I have with Jesus. They don't have the same relationship. They have a different one. And so we never want to try to impose our convictions or our relationships on other people.
Yeah, I have I go through like phases or cycles with like maybe music or entertainment, like TV, even what I watch on YouTube. Like there's some seasons where I'm literally only listening to worship music, and I'm just like watching old videos from pastors' conferences and stuff like that, or listening to Christian podcasts. And like that's pretty much all that I'm consuming. And then there's other times when I'm listening to secular music a little more, and like I don't listen to like terrible music, but I listen to like pop punk music, like borderline emo music is like what I love, which really surprises people when they hear that a lot of times. They don't assume that'd be my genre, but I just like that stuff, like Simple Plan and
are you giving them shout outs now?
Like
what's on your playlist,
middle school
Hagen?
type bands.
Yeah.
And for the most part, they're just talking about how life's hard.
Yeah.
Which is just great. And for some reason, I just really like the sound of it and the tone of it. So like I'm coming out of a season where I've been consuming quite a bit of that. But even just within the past few weeks, it's like I'm listening to that less and less and less. And I'm just kind of swinging back over to some more Christian-y type stuff. Yeah. So
something I kind of wanted to talk about that just popped into my head was related to this. In Bible college, I had a good friend named Silas. Shout out Silas Spreen. Silas, you better be watching this. And we had a lot of conversations, and he kind of got me thinking about this whole thing because Silas is a fan of art. He's a very gentle soul. He likes art. He likes things. And he would be when we started talking about naked statues, like the statue of David. Okay. And Silas was like, are you okay with that? And me, my gut reaction was like, of course not. That's nudity. That's like, you don't want to, like, that's just gross, get that out here. But then Silas was like, well, no, it's like the human body. There's nothing, and I think this is important, there's nothing wrong with the human body. There's nothing inherently evil about a naked person. There's nothing like inherently evil. Yeah. And
what it does to you might be
for sure. Yeah, that's important. And so he just kind of opened my eyes to that. And so nudity in art is like, well, like I think that's a big like Christian gray area where it's like you definitely just want to be very careful.
Sure.
Very, very, very careful. But would I say going to a museum and seeing the statue of David, even though it's naked, is that sin? No, of course not. Sure. Like, that's not a problem. Would I bring my kids? Probably not. Probably not. But I also when I think about this, I also don't want to. I think you've touched on this, and I've heard this, and I think it's good. I think in Christian culture, we want to be so protective, we want to be so safe that sometimes we put taboos on
you
things.
give something power that would normally not have as much power.
Yeah.
But because you're making such a big deal about it,
the bot, like, you should never ever see something, like, and we give it like too much power, and like I wouldn't want, it's like the naked body's not that crazy of a thing. It can
everyone
be.
has a naked body.
Everyone has a naked body
underneath your clothes.
Yeah,
That's
underneath your clothes, for sure. And we don't want to like give our exactly. We don't want to give it power when it shouldn't have power. Like, just the idea of something being naked, it's like not that big of a deal inherently by itself, and I don't want my kids to think, oh my gosh, it's like, oh my gosh, the statue of David's naked. It's like the worst thing in the world. It's like, no, it's not. Like, this is how God made us. I think the same thing with sex could be said. Like, we sometimes put a big taboo. Like, sex is this big, and sometimes it's a big evil thing when actually it's
which is not healthy. Which is not healthy at all.
Yes. Yeah, and sometimes we get that message. Unintentionally, we get that message across to Christian kids: is sex is evil, sex is this. And it's like, no, sex is a great, awesome, beautiful thing.
Yeah.
And we want to encourage that so that when those kids grow up and get married, they're not having to wrestle with like, oh, like, is this okay? Is this not okay? It's like that can cause real damage and harm. So
if there was one question that I could ask God, honestly, this is really one of the biggest, like, I can't quite figure out why it works this way. It's like, why do you allow kids to go through puberty so young?
Huh.
It's like, because they're like ready, but they're kids. And it's like, why? How about they go through puberty at like 20 when they're ready to be married, not when they're 12 and 13?
Well, they used to get married way younger.
Maybe parts of the problem is our culture and how we've done things. But it's just like, why are these? Why do they blossom so young?
Yeah.
When it's like,
it used to be you got married at 16 or whatever.
Yeah. But I agree with a lot of, and people have different convictions. So some Christians would not be comfortable taking their families to maybe even like a beach, because you're going to have men and women not wearing a whole lot of clothes. But to me, at a beach, that's an okay place for that, right? Walking down Main Street maybe isn't the best place to be wearing a swimming suit. But when you're swimming or you're at a beach, then that's an appropriate context.
Yes.
And
that's where I go back to my whole circle of, okay, context, audience, who's around, where am I at? Culture, I think, does play a slight part in that. Like, there's some things in our culture that's like, that's not okay, that's inappropriate for Main Street in our culture. And that could be different in another culture, but in our culture, it's like, yeah, just avoid that. Don't do that. Right?
Main Street in Vegas has a whole different standard.
Yeah. I'm not saying that, but and then of course conviction. Like, for me and my family, we just don't feel right about going to the beach. It's like, good on you. And that's cool.
That's fine.
That's cool.
Or so I know of many families that if they do go swimming, both boys and girls need to be wearing T-shirts.
Yeah.
And that's just the rule they make, and that's fine. But there's nothing wrong with a boy only wearing shorts when they're swimming per se, in general, unless it's a personal conviction to the family, and then they can choose that.
And this is where, and just to kind of tie it, this is where culture, I think, is important, because you go to like other cultures and it's completely okay for both boys and girls to both have tops on.
Sure.
You go, but in our culture, it's like, no, girls shouldn't, and like, culture's not it's not the most important thing, but it does matter. And in our culture, like, that's not okay. And so we as Christians should respect that and not say, well, I'm not of this world and I don't have to care about this culture, therefore me as a girl can just swim without my top. It's like, no, it does matter a little bit.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where my logic is with all this.
Because there's tribes in Africa that are topless.
For sure.
But there's nothing sensual about that for them.
For sure.
You might look at it as an American with perversion and make it that way.
Yes.
They're just living their life.
Yes.
For whatever reason, they never figured out, maybe I should just put something on top of me. And it's like, okay.
Yeah.
For them. Another idea here that's kind of part of it that I was thinking last night. So my friend Ryan Reese has a ministry called the Whosoevers, and a lot of their art and their graphics is kind of what maybe some people would say is dark, like a skeleton hands, like praying.
Yeah.
And on the same kind of theme, Christians could look at that and say, well, skeleton hands is speaking of death or darkness, and that's inappropriate to mix that with Jesus or with the gospel. But there's strategy to that. One, they're trying to reach a certain type of people, so that's one thing. And then, but two, there's symbolism behind this, and that like I was once dead, and this is who I. So I just saw that last night, even on Instagram, thinking about this conversation, and thought that's an area where a hyper, for lack of a better term, hyper conservative and practice Christian could look at a ministry like that and say, and a ministry that has skulls or crossbones or skeletons cannot be good.
Yeah.
But essentially, regardless of whether it's the music or the words that we speak or what we're watching or what we're doing or what we're wearing, it does all boil back down to the heart.
For sure.
And we don't want to forget what Paul taught in Romans on how whatever it is we're doing, we don't want to be making our brother stumble. So
that's a big thing.
Back to if it's the attitude
everything would be okay if I was the only person on the planet.
Sure, yeah.
Everything would be fine.
Yeah.
It's like I can't hurt anyone. I can't not love anyone if I'm the only one.
Yeah.
But we live in a world with other people.
Yeah.
And so keep going. I'm sorry.
So that's where maybe it would tie into whether if I think something is funny or not, if me being a part of it, me engaging in it, or me even telling the joke is going to cause other people around me to stumble, then it's probably best to just avoid it.
For sure.
Yeah.
That's completely true. Yeah, and I think it's really important to be self-aware and realize that we're all like super judgmental. Like we like to pretend that like, oh, look at those other people, they're judgmental, but I would never judge someone. But we all got our thing.
Right.
That, like if someone would do that, we would just like that's not okay. That's not right. We all got, and some people definitely have way more than others, but we all got our thing where we just like, for some reason, maybe because it's the way we grew up, or maybe just something that we convinced ourselves, we think that's never ever okay in any context. And we just convince ourselves of that. So anytime we see someone doing that, we instantly just judge them and look down.
Right,
upon.
and because
we all got that in us, and we want to be aware.
Yeah, because I've never spent my free time, or I've never got any enjoyment out of that. I'm a little better. That's the thing that feeds the ego or the pride.
For sure.
So like examples maybe. So when I was in high school, just to give like maybe a few specific examples and see where you land on it. So the show The Big Bang Theory was a big deal.
Wow,
Have you heard of it?
Yeah.
Have you seen
My
it?
dad likes it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, yeah. I don't know if we would. Yeah.
So even just this past weekend when I was up in Washington, I'm at a hotel and flipping through the channels, and The Big Bang Theory's on. So I like watch half of an episode. And not last time I was on a plane, they were on the plane as well.
Propagating
and I watched
evolution.
some of the episodes.
Hagen, how dare
And it's
you?
like, is that show a little bit inappropriate? Yes, it is sometimes. In the humor that they use. But I like the characters. It's nostalgic. I used to watch it when I was younger. So is it wrong of me, Jordan, to have watched that?
No, because your heart's completely fine with it, and it's like, yeah, your intent's completely good with it.
So here's the pushback, though, from
Okay.
someone who's maybe like way more extreme. It's bad for me because I am getting entertainment out of something that is evil.
Yeah.
Like I shouldn't be entertained by something like that. But the problem with that is then what are you entertained by?
For sure.
Can
and
you
I think,
only watch VeggieTales,
yeah.
Superbook, and listen to Chris Tomlin? Is that your whole
I think
world?
I think you have to realize a show itself about roommates living together and doing science and being whacking around. I've never watched the show. I guess that's what they do. There's nothing inherently evil about that, right? It's just a TV show. It's just entertainment. And there's some parts of it that are bad, and there's some parts of it that are good. And you just want to be asking yourself, which part am I mainly getting enjoyment out of? And you be honest and be open. And maybe there's definitely some Christians like, you know what, this show has these kind of jokes in it, and I just don't feel good about that, and I'm just gonna turn it off, and that's completely fine.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And I'm that way on
Some things,
pretty much only one thing as far as consuming content.
Yeah.
And it's just like mockery of like Jesus or God.
For
Like
sure.
when they start getting into that, then I'm just like done. I'll
Mm-hmm.
put up with swear words a lot, but when it's like becomes that, I immediately it's like I don't want it.
Yeah. For sure.
So-
No, yeah, I definitely feel that. Yeah. Horror movies. We talked about this. Yeah,
Right.
you don't like horror movies.
Yeah, I have a
at
zero.
all.
I've never watched horror movies. I have zero desire to
Yeah.
do it,
And
and
have
because I've done it, because
Oh.
I've never done it.
Do you kind of look down on people who really enjoy them?
Sure,
Yeah.
it's like how could you watch that? Because to me, that's blatant evil.
Mm-hmm.
It's blatant spirit of fear. It's blatant darkness and not light. So it's like, why would I want to watch an hour and a half movie that's just centered around trying to freak me out? And specifically, if it's glorifying things like evil spirits, particularly in demon possession. But I will watch a movie about demon possession because
Yeah.
we watch, what's that Christian movie we watch?
Not Unplanned.
Right, not Unplanned. That's about something else.
Nefarious.
Nefarious,
Yeah.
yeah. And Nefarious is a rated R movie.
Yeah.
That-
And it should not be a rated R movie.
Right.
No.
That
it's-
is
yeah. And it was
about a
only
guy-
rated R because they didn't want people to go and watch it. And sometimes they do that.
There you
And
go.
they actually
It's
did the
about
same-
the Illuminati
they-
getting it. Yeah,
They
yeah,
did the same thing with Unplanned. It's
Mm.
about a movie about abortion.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't be rated R in any sense of the word. But
Yeah.
yeah.
But Nefarious is like a horror movie, but the
Mm.
difference is the heart of Nefarious is about how Jesus wins.
Yes.
And so I watched that and I was chill with it, and I've shown it to a few people, like watched it with them, and if you can tolerate it, I would highly recommend it because it's a beautifully well done.
Yeah.
On how similar to maybe like the Screw Tape Letters with C.S. Lewis, just this really cool artistic way of talking about how demons are influencing our world, but how Jesus is more powerful ultimately. So
Yeah.
I do have a line, but it's not like I won't watch any movie that's about possession because that's one that is, but the intent of it is not glorifying possession.
Yeah.
It's communicating an interesting spiritual truth
sure.
from another angle.
Yeah.
So
And I think there's definitely some horror movies or just movies in general where it's like it's so gory and weird and evil and perverted where I would be bold enough to say, you know what, if you're a Christian, you do not have any business watching that movie. There are some movies where it's just like, heck no way.
Yeah.
Like, what part of this? What? Give me one part of this that is actually good. It's like maybe the same thing. Like it's just like pornography. It's like no, you as a Christian should not be watching pornography.
Sure.
You're not watching pornography for the story. Yeah. And so I think it comes to a point where like in the horror movie or some media where it's just like no
Yeah.
way. But at the same time, there's plenty of horror movies where it's like. And I definitely have more of a sensitivity to this. I'm definitely way more on your side, not completely on your side, but more closer to you now than I've ever been before. Because in high school, I'd watch these movies, and it wouldn't really bother me at all. And it's just like
horror movies?
It's like it's a scary movie, yeah. And it's like okay, and there's like not too much bad stuff. There's maybe some language and maybe a little blood, but besides that, it's like okay, and it's like it's just entertainment. And it's like it's like, oh, I got scared. Oh yeah. And it's just like that. And it's like, sure, it's not the worst thing in the world. Now the more you in my relationship with Jesus, now I am a little bit more aware. It's like, yeah, I don't like that. I don't like that kind of stuff. And I wouldn't want to watch that kind of stuff. But yeah, I might expose myself. But even last night, me and my two buddies, we watched something online where it's like, and it was like a creepy 46-minute YouTube video, and they just wanted to show it to me just to scare me. And like,
did it work?
Kind of. They pretended. They're like, oh, we've never watched this before. They're like, oh, this is real, Jordan. This might be real. And like I knew they were lying. So they just wanted to watch to scare me. And it's like it wasn't that scary. Avery, I did jump like twice. Did I what? She's saying I'm screaming. I did not scream.
But there's this weird.
But it's just like, yeah.
So whether if it's sexual perversion or horror or darkness, there is like this big attraction to the flesh. Because if you just go to your podcast app, the top podcasts are all about murder. They're
sure.
all about murder.
Yes.
They're about how to get away with murder. They're about these creepy murder stories. And our culture is obsessed with like hearing about these things, which is very interesting.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you want to, you definitely want to be aware of that. And yeah, you definitely want to be aware, and you want to see
True
the
crime,
world's
yeah.
pushing in this direction, because the world's trying to get us to be more perverted, more weird, and it's breaking down. There's no longer this idea of clean and unclean. It's just like everything's evil, everything's murky and whatever. You want to be careful with the messaging in movies, because with all media is very, very powerful. Movies are very, very powerful. What we take in is very powerful, and the messaging in most movies today, well, I wouldn't say most, but as far as like you watch like superhero movies, like it used to be good guy, good guy who wins, yay. But now it's, oh, look at this bad guy. Let's feel bad for them. Let's justify them, and let's cheer for them. And that's kind of the general push. And again, I would see that as a breaking down of these ideas. Oh, there really isn't evil. There really isn't good. Let's just mix it all together. And you see that definitely in the push. And you just want to be aware of that. You want to be careful of that. You want to be careful about what you're supporting as a Christian, what you're openly supporting. And you just want to, just be wise, be thinking about these things. Yeah, don't just go with the flow for most things. Be like, really be intentional. Like, what am I allowing into my mind? What am I okay with? What am I not okay with? And just be intentional. I think if every Christian would just do that, we wouldn't even have to talk about these things. If every Christian would just be very intentional of like, and ask, hey, Jesus, should I watch this? And just ask him and pray about it and seek him on it. I think we would be completely fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, everything has an agenda.
For sure.
It's good or bad.
Yeah.
Every movie has a
can be a
place
completely
it's trying to push
clean
you to.
Disney movie. Well, Disney nowadays.
Sure.
It's like Disney is like a prime example of pushing all these agendas and trying to get us to think a certain way. And there's some people who say, well, I'm not going to watch Disney.
Sure.
And like that's okay. And I wouldn't go that far. But
and that really makes us mad, kind of. But it's like, but that's what we do.
Yes.
If you have a platform, we use that platform to glorify Jesus. But then we look at the world, and even with like singers and like Taylor Swift and like big athletes, it's like, just play the game, just sing the song. We don't care about your political beliefs. And it's like, you say that against the people you don't like, and I understand. But as soon as Tim Tebow uses his platform to glorify Jesus, we're like, yes. So you don't want him to just play the game. You want him to use his platform to glorify his conviction. And right now, you have some evil people with big platforms, but I don't judge them for pushing their agenda. That's exactly what you would want to do.
Yeah.
So praise God for, and they're getting better over time for the most part. Christian movies are getting better. They're less cheesy. The Chosen has done really well as far as making some pretty good content that's glorifying Jesus. And like to have more of that in our life is a good thing. To kind of just compete a little bit, to give another option, another alternative to being able to consume something that's both entertaining and not pushing an opposite agenda of what we're about. So
yeah. Yep, everyone's got an agenda. Never believe someone if they say they don't have a bias or they don't have an agenda.
Sure, yeah.
They do. Everyone does. We all have biases. We all have agendas. We all want to get something across no matter what we're doing, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I like what you said. You don't want to just judge someone because it's like, well, they're saying what they believe. It's like, of course you would too.
Yeah.
So you don't want to judge them just on that.
Right. I might not like what they believe, but at least they're saying it and taking advantage of their platform. Yeah.
Well, cool. Well, Hagen, I think we covered a lot of ground today.
And I don't want to. This almost sound like I agree with you, so I want to be careful.
Okay, good.
I'm kidding.
It almost sounds like I convinced you, but you don't want.
There's times, and it's a little trickier now that I'm a pastor, but even before that, when I was just a Christian working in like construction, like people figure out pretty quickly, like, oh, you're a Christian, oh, you don't swear, and they'll like say stuff like that, or like, or they'll swear a bit, and be, oh, you can't say that around Hagen, and it's like you never once say that, but your presence brings that out of them.
Yes.
Right.
And I would say that's probably the Holy Spirit convicting
I would
them.
think so.
And I would say, like, yeah, Jesus said the world's going to hate you. Like that. And I think there is a spirit of the world that sees Christians and instantly is like, they get annoyed at you. They don't like it. And so they'll say things or they'll do things, but they'll something about it. Yeah. So yeah,
that's just interesting. Like
and then
just
I
our
would say you would ruin that by
just saying, well, it's not that big of a deal, and just start talking just like them, because then you'll ruin maybe that work the Holy Spirit's trying to do by you just giving in and saying, well, it's not that big of they're just words, it doesn't matter, so
Yeah.
I'll stop there. Yeah, I could have one more thing to say.
Do you have it?
I do, but it's like I don't want to be too much confrontational.
No.
I don't want to argue too much.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
yeah.
So, words are powerful.
Words matter.
Words matter.
Mm-hmm.
Words have intent.
Mm-hmm.
They have personal intent. Whether if I like it or not, they do have cultural intent.
Mm-hmm.
I can decide if I want to surrender that or not, but they
Sure.
do have cultural intent. We want to be careful what we say as Christians. We don't want to be cursing people. Like that's even just like speaking ill of people. When it talks about like bless and do not curse, it's like I shouldn't be like, I hope Jordan gets in a car crash, or I hope Jordan goes bald because I hate his hair. like that's negative things that I'm speaking over your life, and God wants us to speak blessings and life over people, not death and cursing. So there's that part of it as well.
And a Christian who would never curse will gossip the day away.
Sure, which is bad.
So that's a big problem.
So there can be a thing of, well, I never say the F word, I never say
and I feel
all the
good
other
about
words.
myself, but I'll always just
but I
down
gossip
to
or I speak
people.
curses or I'm judgmental, and that's
not okay.
So part of maybe the point of this podcast is to remind us all of we're all just as guilty as everyone else. We need to have grace for one another. If you're someone that maybe swears a whole lot, maybe just think about that a little bit.
For sure.
Right?
I think half of this is just being self-aware and then asking yourself, hey, Jesus, should I say these words that are really inappropriate and just have a relationship? And I think Jesus will probably make it clear to you. He's like, no, you shouldn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, again, just like read that Ephesians passage. Filthy language, corrupt talk, coarse jesting. And if words start popping into your head, those are probably the words Jesus wants you to avoid because he's speaking to you through his word. So,
and don't think just because you don't say the swear words and you say substitute ones that your heart's better than the other guy.
For sure.
Because my argument is that those substitute ones can make you just as guilty as far as the evilness in your heart as the guy who's actually just saying the real deal.
Yes. We're so out of time. But going back to that whole construction example of like, okay, this guy's a Christian, he doesn't say these words. You're hammering away, you hit your finger, and you say shoot instead of the other word. You say shoot, or you say frick, or you say something like that. Your heart there, you're angry, so you said these words. Like, that's not good in the sense that you shouldn't just use these filler words. But the fact that you wanted to maybe say another
this
word.
Is where we disagree.
I think it's where we disagree. The fact that you genuinely wanted to say all sorts of bad words, but you use some degree of self-control and was like, I'm not going to say these words. I'm going to say this other word because I know that this would be a bad witness. I know that this is a filthy talk, and I just don't want to say these words. And so I'm going to use this other filler word. I do think there's a degree there of self-control, and I do think that just using those filler words can make someone sound hypocritical or be like, oh, look at me. But I do think there is a degree of self-control of choosing, instead of saying all these filthy words, I'm going to use not filthy words, because gosh darn it, it's not a taboo filthy word in our culture. There is another one that's like, yeah, you probably shouldn't say that. And and I know that because I'm able to say this, and then when I'm editing it, I'll put okay for kids. and I think we disagree, but I think there is some degree, and it's not the whole deal, not the whole picture, but there is some degree of self-control in me choosing, instead of saying these words, I'm going to, instead of just using the F word as a filler word whenever I don't know what to say, I'm not going to say that, and maybe I'll occasionally say some like, oh, frick, or something.
You're
like
just going to use a different filler word that you're more comfortable with.
Because that word, not that I'm just more comfortable with, but in general, that word's accepted. And the other filler word I wanted to use, or I could have used, was not accepted.
Right. And
I think that's
to
just
me, the critic would say on the outside looking in, it's just there's a inconsistency to that. And if you're going to use words that mean nothing, because that's the conversation we didn't have about swear words. Is that every word has an unswearing intent. There's a right way to use every word. right?
Yes.
And then there's a wrong way to use every word.
for sure.
But we have a group of words that we use the wrong way a lot, and we
Mm.
call those swear words.
Yes.
So there's an actual intent for every single one of those words that you would have to label this podcast as explicit if we would use it.
Mm-hmm.
But when we use them in the wrong application, they become empty words. They become vain words. They become not meaning what they're supposed to mean. And then they've become just crazy in society.
Yes. And I would say that those words are, because of our culture, they're filthy. And not because of their meaning at all, just because these words we've decided as America for some reason, like these are filthy words. And I would say in Paul's day, there were probably a whole bunch of words that people would use even though they had no connection to their meaning that were filthy words. And me just saying a word that's not connected to its meaning is not inherently wrong, right?
Correct.
Yeah. I wouldn't say that is because the Bible says don't speak empty words or don't speak vain words. I would say that's probably not what the Bible's talking about there.
Right.
I would say that's probably speaking of like don't say something and not be able to back it up. Don't make empty promises.
Say what you mean.
Say what you mean. Yeah,
Right.
yeah. But I wouldn't say like it's a problem to say gosh. It's like, well, gosh doesn't mean anything. It's like, well, yeah, I'm just saying gosh.
It means nothing.
Yeah,
Yeah. So why are you saying it?
because it's just a filler. Because it's how we talk.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And in my culture, that's completely okay. Yeah.
Yeah, that's where I just can't wrap
Okay.
my mind
Yeah, and
around
that's
how
okay.
like that is maybe better than an
Yeah.
alternative.
I'm not using empty talk in this as cause I believe when the Bible talks about empty talk, it's talking about like making a promise that you're not going to do. That's what empty talk is, or vain repetition as far as like praying to God. Like that's different things than just saying, "Gosh." Yeah.
Sure. Well, okay, because empty talk.
I disagree. I think we have a different definition of empty
Right.
talk.
If
here.
you say,
I think you apply
gosh
it to
darn
here.
it, but you say the real thing.
Uh-huh.
What you're actually doing is you're asking God to damn something, right? Gosh darn
No,
it.
I'm not. That's not my intent, and that's not what it means. It's just a different way of saying it.
No.
But it's not. But it's like it sounds like it.
No,
but
yeah,
it doesn't
it's
have a
the
different.
exact same thing.
No, it's not.
Yeah. So no,
I don't think it's the.
Listen
exact
to
same
what I'm
thing.
saying.
Okay.
And I'm trying to be careful because of the podcast, but so gosh darn it is what would be maybe much more appropriate. There's the actual swearing terminology over here, GD, right?
Mm-hmm.
When someone says GD, they're saying, God, I'm asking you to damn something, right? But they don't actually mean that. They don't even know what that means. It's empty talk. It's empty talk. When someone slams on their brake in front of you and you're just like, GD, and you slam on your brakes, it's like you don't actually mean for that thing to be damned. You're just saying something, right?
Yeah,
Are you tracking with me?
for sure.
Okay, so that's an example to me of empty talk.
Yeah.
You're saying something that means something, but you don't actually mean what it says. And it's actually serious. To say something to be damned is very serious.
For sure. So instead
to pretend
of
like
saying
that's not a
that
big deal
word,
is a
I'll
huge
say
deal.
darn.
What does that mean?
Nothing. It doesn't
See,
mean. It
and that's
doesn't.
where
It doesn't mean what
the
other one
I don't
means.
buy it. I don't buy it.
Yeah,
I think it actually means the same thing. in
But
the
it
heart.
doesn't. But it doesn't. We just admit that the heart doesn't know. The heart doesn't care. The heart's not saying. Like the heart's not thinking about that.
Right.
Yeah.
Unless
So-
it is.
Well, then that's a problem. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. So the heart does. The intent is really important. Yeah. But. Yeah. So okay. Well, I think this is a good conversation. I'm glad we got recorded
Again,
here.
I do not advocate cussing at all.
For sure.
And I really don't swear much at all unless I'm maybe mechanicking, and then I get frustrated sometimes. But it's just, I just think it's a real danger to specifically maybe look at people that come into church and maybe you hear them talk and they say the real cuss words and you're just saying pretend ones and you think that you're better than them. That's my biggest argument.
Sure.
If you want to swear, swear.
Yeah.
Don't just use the kiddie words. That's kind of how my attitude is about it.
Yeah.
Because there's just like, why just use these other ones? And because they're more acceptable, then I'm better than these other people, or I'm not as guilty as having bitterness in my heart. When really, that's what those words are coming out for a reason, and it's because there's something in here that Jesus can and is working on, and we just want to allow him to continue to work on us in whatever phase of life we're in.
That's awesome.
Capiche?
Yeah. Capiche. Yeah.
Okay.
That's good. Well, hey, that's okay. Well, me and Hagen, let us know who do you think is right. Or if you even understand what we were talking about, because it's kind of, it's confusing. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a fun one.
Sure.
This has been a lively one, I definitely say. And yeah, have a good day.
But a great example of this, Jordan,
Oh.
is that we kind of disagree on this still.
For sure.
And I still don't quite I actually think I do understand where you're coming from, but I just don't,
You don't
agree with it.
Yeah, that's okay.
And
I think I definitely see where you're coming from. I just don't think that you.
And we can still be really good friends, and we can still teach the Bible together, and life is okay.
Yep.
So this is a great example of a gray issue of two people kind of disagreeing on, but there's zero division in it. We can find unity in it, in that where your conclusion gets you is fine.
Yeah.
Like, it's not getting you to somewhere that's sinful.
Yeah.
And where my conclusion getting me is fine.
Yeah.
So we can still walk together in unity. So
That's good.
thank you,
Well,
Jordan.
hey, maybe we should just go out to lunch together.
Maybe. Yes.
Maybe. Cool. Cute. Well, we didn't even touch on Halloween or stuff like that. I was kind of thinking of getting there, but that'll have
Maybe
to
we'll
be
have to do a whole episode on just holidays. Cultural holidays.
Yeah.
And we'll wait till
Yeah.
Halloween to do it or something.
Ooh,
Yeah.
that'll be fun. Cool. Okay. Well, we're done now, I promise.
Yes.
Okay. See ya. Bye-bye.
Bye.